Over the weekend, Amanda and I took a trip to Philly to visit the Game Masters exhibit inside the Franklin Institute. It's an exhibit showcasing a brief history of video games, starting with the arcades, moving into a lot of classic PC games, and moving into more modern indie games and mobile games. It's a rather cool brief overview of the history of video games with a specific focus on 30 different innovative game designers. We arrived well before opening so we could get in as soon as the doors opened, and that way we could take a quick walk through the entire exhibit before it got really crowded. So that's what you're going to see here, is us just kind of going through the whole thing, taking a good look around, and then we went back through the whole thing and played some games that stood out to us or things we hadn't seen before, and just had a lot of fun taking a closer look at stuff. But first we just kind of went through the whole thing just so we can get a little bit of footage of everything and check the whole place out. Once we got into the actual exhibit, I wasn't able to record any sound, so that's why I have just kind of the background music going on here and my voiceover. They were blasting a lot of really great 80s music. It was fantastic and really added to the atmosphere, especially in the arcade section, but obviously that's immediate copyright strikes throughout the whole thing, so I wasn't able to record any of that, sadly, but lots of visuals. Started off in the arcade section here, and you can already see on some of the walls they have a lot of names of different game designers and then some machines that they helped create, and it's pretty fascinating. There's a good variety too. Amanda pointed out the Tower of Draga machine in the corner there that I completely missed because that's one of my favorite old arcade games. And Donkey Kong here with Shigeru Miyamoto was just about the only Nintendo thing here. That's one thing we noticed. It was definitely lacking in an overall historical perspective of video games, but it did a really good job with the individual creators that it was highlighting. So it was something where it was a bit lacking in one form, but when it did focus on a certain era or a certain creator, there was a lot of stuff there. It was very informative and a great look at those individual things. So it was a bit hit or miss. It depends what you were looking for. So when it really put forth the effort, there was some really cool displays here and playable games, but some other aspects that I'll talk about later on were a bit lacking. And we found Yu Suzuki. He is one of the featured creators here, especially because his importance with Sega in the early arcade days, and then moving on to Shenmue, of course. So again, when they did have a featured creator, they did a really good job with that. And as you can see, this was perfect. There are very few people in here in the very beginning, so great opportunity just to walk through the whole place and look at everything and then go back and get a closer look at things. Had to stop for a minute to look at Shenmue 2. And this was cool. Again, when they had a lot of featured creators, they had these video interviews that you could look at, and there are about 7 or 8 of these throughout the exhibit. They had a ton of playable PC games. Actually, I think there were almost as many PC games as arcade games. And of course, even though we were just kind of going through for a quick look through, I had to stop for a minute to play Dungeon Keeper, my favorite PC game of all time, but one I haven't played in years because I haven't had a copy since the 90s. So I had to take a few minutes here. Hopefully I'll get another copy of that game someday. Now that we made our way through most of the exhibit, we decided to go back and start taking a closer look at some of the things that stood out to us, play some of the games, and just kind of have fun until the crowds rolled in. And of course, the first thing that I decided to do on my way back was stop and play Shenmue 2 for a few minutes. Not that I don't own multiple copies and will be playing it again in about a month, but I had to take a few minutes and pay my respects. It was definitely a fun experience, and we were able to get in at least another hour or so before the crowd started rolling in, and then eventually got to the point where you couldn't really be hands-on with a lot of stuff, just too many people, so we spent a little over an hour after the initial walk through the whole thing. So that was good. I'm glad we were able to get there early and do that first before it got crazy. One of the things, though, that really stood out as far as the negatives of the exhibit, and again, the whole thing was a heck of a lot of fun, a great way to spend the morning. A great look at some classic games, some that I haven't played in years, and it was a lot of fun. They did a really good job, again, showing a lot of the developer specific displays, really looking at the highlighted people. That was very well done. The one thing that was lacking was they had a lot of older games that were plugged into LCD screens, or some of them HD monitors and things like that, and they just didn't look very good. And it was made worse then too that a lot of the consoles had very generic third-party controllers, which again it's a kind of nitpicky, but then you had games like Nights into Dreams, which was using a really generic clunky Saturn controller, like third-party controller, that already just didn't feel right. And then if you're gonna have a display of Nights into Dreams on the actual Saturn and really make a point of it being one of the things in the showcase, why not have the Saturn 3D controller, that type of thing? And a lot of consoles had that, and a lot of the older games too were also being emulated, or they were on a Xbox 360 or PS3 or that type of thing. That was one thing that was very lacking. There were a handful of Dreamcast games on display, but there was not a single Dreamcast in the entire exhibit. And again, there was basically no Nintendo outside of Donkey Kong in the arcade. And again, the third-party controller thing was just kind of a weird thing that we noticed throughout a lot of them. It just affected the experience a little bit, because it took away a little bit of the historical value of the exhibit. But overall, again, didn't hurt it that much.
Man, to win.
Overall, we had a blast exploring everything and playing the arcade games, and just getting a fun look at some older games that maybe we haven't played in a long time, and a brief little closer look at some really important developers over the decades. So it was a lot of fun. Add some educational points, and again also some setbacks as far as the actual historical value perspective, but overall it was just a lot of fun. We had a great experience, and then once the crowd started really rolling in as we got closer to the afternoon time, we decided to head out and explore the rest of the Franklin Institute, because there's a lot to see. We ended up exploring the majority of the place, and then also taking in a show at the planetarium, and hopefully you'll join us next time for a look at the rest of the Franklin Institute.